Hey guys, so Jasmine here, and I am just gonna chat with you guys about some things that have been coming up in discussion with various friends on different people's posts and walls, and just share my perspective. Again, that's the only perspective I can share is my own. I don't speak for any entire group, but I do believe that I have a very informed perspective that I can share, both being a Black woman who has been raised in a Black family, who we've all had our own experiences in this world, as well as having studied sociology in an academic setting. And so that was something that I spent a great deal of time debating and discussing and researching and stuff with my peers and classmates and other intellectuals. And so I think I have a slightly more unique perspective just in the fact that, like, I've sat and I've debated multiple sides of any argument with people who I really respected. And so I think playing devil's advocate is something that I've been comfortable doing, even if I don't always necessarily agree with it. And that said, there are a handful of devil's advocates that are, making people's timelines and feeds and stuff quite a bit right now. And that's like the Candace Owens and Coleman Hughes and, various celebrities who've come out and said certain things, leaning much more heavily on the conservative side, siding with generally what would be considered like the majority opinion about, what is systemic racism and are there opportunities equal within, all communities and stuff like that. And while I think that's a whole nother debate in and of itself, I do think that I personally am very well aware that there are and have always been structures that have been put in place to limit certain people's accesses to things. But a lot of those have changed, and there have been a lot of improvements made to the point where theoretically everyone could have access to anything that their heart desires. But, from a sociological perspective, we know that theory, that fallacy of like, bootstrapping and like working hard that's not really true. Like, no matter how hard you work, there are certain things that are just going to get in the way, and it could just be straight fate and COVID and, opportunities drying up that are far beyond your own source of control. As we know, your name can limit the access to different things. And so I think more so than systemic problems, there are biases, and there are stigmas, and there are these subconscious issues that I think do far more damage on a wider scale than these grand scale systemic, horrific incidences that we see from time to time on the news, that are awful, but are often refuted because of the statistical significance of how frequently they may occur, and so, I think it's those subtleties, those microaggressions that occur that happen to people on a day-to-day, basis multiple times a day that are more likely to alter one's destiny than even some major structural systemic problems. And so I will say, to an extent, I do have some level of agreement with this idea that, there are systems and organizations that are trying to manipulate and sway people's opinions about how certain accesses are limited. But that's not to say that the accesses aren't limited. I just don't believe that they're limited in the ways that sometimes maybe mainstream media or certain organizations like to suggest that they are. But with regards to these kind of devil's advocates of like a Candace Owens or Coleman Hughes, like, what is the danger of those type of people? And I think that these are very smart people. While I may not necessarily agree with the disposition that they have in certain instances, I think that sensationalized, especially with Candace Owens, I think that her approach is much more sensationalized because her audience just demands that sort of thing, and that's just it just is what it is. But I think with regards to audience, I think it's always very helpful if you're not sure like what to think about, like where this person's allegiances might be, to scroll through the comment section of anything that's posted by somebody and just see like in the comment section if there are comments, like what's being said, who is it that's approving or debunking or detracting from this person's statement, and you can kind of see like who's really supporting this person. Is it really is it really who you think it is that's supporting this person? And I'll leave it at that. But I think that the danger of really latching onto these folks sometimes is that you may be finding yourself in some sort of a confirmation bias situation. And a confirmation bias is the tendency to view new evidence through the lens or as confirmation for an existing view that or belief that you already hold. And so if you believe that everyone has access to all the same opportunities, then you will look for someone who will confirm that particular bias, and it will only be furthered if that person seems to not be the type of person who should actually support this. And so I think that and I almost hate using this term, but that like token Black person who maybe fits into this category is very possible that you could be seeking out a confirmation bias in this person. And so I would like to make sure that everybody takes a very analytical approach when you look at those sort of things and just see who's supporting this person and what might their agenda be in what they're supporting. For example, Coleman Hughes, who, if you don't know him, he's a young Black Puerto Rican gentleman who about 23, 24 years old, really, really educated, sound logically. And there's just a few things that he says sometimes that I'm just like, I'm not really sure that information is especially reflective of the circumstances that people experience. And so while it may, we know statistics can be skewed, they can be altered, data can be manipulated, and just because something is on paper one way, that doesn't mean experientially it's the same way. And so I think that, making sure that you keep those separate is important as well. But, again, I don't especially have anything against him. I just think that, it's good to take a step back and say, like, why is it that I'm affirming his specific viewpoint that seems to be so contradictory to what everybody else is saying? And, make your own informed opinions. But I think, especially as Christians, we need to look at things through the lens of Christ. Sadly, I almost hate that this is the case, but, talking to my Christian relatives and friends who are Black, many of them have not had a whole lot of hope that the situation's gonna change. Everybody is really hyped up about things right now, and there's a lot of momentum, and there are a lot of changes that are being made, which is wonderful. But at the end of the day, those heart issues, if those heart issues aren't addressed, we could very well see ourselves in the same situation or worse a couple months down the road, if not sooner, which would be unfortunate. But I say that to say that, like, because it is a heart issue, we need to deal with it at the heart level. And I know that a lot of people right now are trying to have these discussions, these dialogues, and are hoping that maybe some new information may kind of like seep into their heart. Maybe they'll be able to see things through a new lens. And that's my hope and prayer too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be trying to have this conversation. I think one thing that I think is really, really wise is to make sure that you are having conversations that are worthwhile. They're not a waste of your breath. You're keeping your boundaries in place the way that they need to be had. And so if I didn't think there was some hope for some improvement, I wouldn't even waste my breath. But I do think that because it's a hard issue, we have to not be naive to the fact that we are not capable of changing other people's hearts. That's something that only God can do, but actually God won't even force a change in someone's heart. They have to be willing to do that themselves, because if God will force that on people, then everyone would love the Lord, and we know that that is not the case. So we do have free will, which is unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you want to look at it. It's kind of a cool blessing for us to have free will, but that also means that we can't change other people. And so the only thing that we can do is change our own self and how we see ourselves, which is something that thankfully my dad was reminding me of today, as we were talking about this. And do we all experience those times when we go into a store and somebody assumes that we can't pay for something? I've had situations where I've reached out to organizations or people to purchase something, reached out online or whatever and said, hey, can I get a quote for this or whatever? And, essentially been told in not so many words, oh, I don't think you can afford it, so I'm not even going to waste my time to provide you a quote. Like, that stuff really happens, and it's hurtful in some ways. Some friends and relatives of mine who are much older have said, at this point, I don't even expect anything different, and so I'm not shocked when I encounter it, which is to me kind of sad, because I'm like, I would like to have hope for something better, something more, and I think that we all should. But when you look back at, like, how can you see your own self differently in the midst of that? Because you could get discouraged, and you can say, my name or how I look would discourage me from, or detract from me ever having this wonderful opportunity or whatever. And we already know that bootstrapping and that concept of working hard enough to get where you're trying to go isn't really true. As I said before, like, COVID in and of itself could be the thing that stops you from achieving that goal of being an entrepreneur and living your dream, So there's so many things that you can't control about life, that, like, the way you view yourself and how you see yourself through the lens of Christ is really something that you can and really should be trying to control. So I'm going to read from Numbers chapter 13, and in verse 26 it says, now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, we went into the land you sent us, and it truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in that land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of Jordan. But then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we're able to overcome it. The men who'd gone up with him said, we're not well able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying that the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it were men of great stature. There we saw the giants, which are the descendants of Anak, who come from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in theirs. And I've always thought that particular phrasing of that last sentence was interesting, because it could have said, we're grasshoppers in their sight, and so we're grasshoppers in our sight, but they flipped it. It said we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in theirs. And so I think that is like deliberately left the way that it is, just to kind of remind us, like, how are we seeing ourselves? Like, in this particular situation, no, it didn't look like they were capable of defeating the circumstances that they were presented with. And I think you know, and this is another point that my dad made that I think is absolutely necessary to say, like, God doesn't view sin differently, or, you know, in different levels of sin or whatever. So racism from a black person to some other race is just as bad as racism from a white person or Hispanic person, Asian person, Native American person to some other race, you know. So it's not, racism isn't limited to just black and white or one or the other, and there's no severity level of it. But just because you may see yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't see things changing, and I don't see how this gets better, and I don't see how I win in this situation. Like, there's plenty of examples in the Bible where people did win in situations that were stacked against them. And so I think that when we look and we see this is a heart issue, this is a spiritual issue, like the devil is playing the long game on this with this racial division and stuff like that. And I think that that plays a huge part in whatever his plan is for, you know, eventually doing whatever he does at the end of time, you know. But this racial division, that's very strategic and it's very smart, and you know, and unfortunately it's a very real problem. But you have to change how you see your own self. And you know, and I think another thing that's really important as Christians, and this is no knock on all my family members who I've talked to who have experienced years of life and haven't seen the massive changes in this particular area that they were hoping to see over this point in their lifetime. But I think that we still have to have some level of hope that we will see something different in the future. And so to that end, I'll wrap it up with this passage out of Psalms, and or Psalm, but it is Psalm 27, and I'll start in verse 4. One thing I've desired of the Lord, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all my days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he'll hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle he'll hide me. He'll set me high on a rock, and now my head will be lifted high above my enemies all around me. Therefore I'll offer sacrifices of joy in the temple, and I will sing praises to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy on me and answer me. When you say, seek my face, my heart says to you, your face, Lord, I'll seek. Don't hide your face from me. Don't turn from your servant away in anger. You've been my help. Do not leave me or forsake me, O God, my salvation. When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take care of me. Teach me your ways, O Lord. Lead me in a smooth path because of my enemies. Don't deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such breathe out violence. I would have lost heart unless I believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And so at verse 14 concludes that passage in Psalm 27. But, you know, in verse 13, it says, you know, I would have lost heart unless I believed that I would actually see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And that's Old Testament. Like, you know, we have greater blessings that are afforded to us, New Testament church, you know. And so you can't change other people. Yes, there are people who have crazy agendas and biases and things that you have no control over. So I think being careful to listen to discern the voices that you're listening to. Are they speaking truth, or do they have their own agendas that they're trying to push? And that goes every direction. But also making sure that you don't let yourself get disheartened when you see that you're in a situation where it looks like the odds are not in your favor, because God still has your back, and we have to have hope that we will see goodness in the land of the living. So hope you guys have a great night, and God bless you, and we'll chat again soon.